The damaged alien ships crawled through space like wounded animals. Their shiny metal hulls, once perfect and gleaming, now bore deep scars and burn marks from weapons humanity had never seen before. Warning lights flashed red across Earth's defense stations as the foreign vessels approached, moving slow and careful. Nothing like their usual confident arrivals. On the main command bridge orbiting Earth, the air felt thick with tension. Admiral Rebecca Jackson stood perfectly still, her boots planted firm on the metal deck plating. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her face showed nothing, not surprise, not concern, nothing at all. She had learned long ago that showing emotion to aliens was a mistake. The holographic projector hummed to life, casting a shimmering blue light that slowly formed into the shape of Ambassador Velix. The crystalline alien usually glowed with bright, prideful light that hurt human eyes to look at directly. But today, his glow was weak and flickering, like a dying candle in the wind. "Admiral Jackson," Velix said, and even through the translation device, everyone on the bridge could hear something they had never heard from him before. Fear. His voice shook slightly as he continued, "We require immediate military assistance." Captain Tyler Brooks stood behind the Admiral, his fingers dancing across the tactical display screens. Numbers and charts flowed past his eyes as he analyzed the incoming data from the alien fleet. What he saw made his stomach drop. The readings showed only 12 ships in the alien formation. He remembered the last time they had visited there. Had been over 300 vessels in their fleet, all pristine and powerful, designed to intimidate humanity into submission. "The Devourers have awakened in the galactic core," Velix explained, his crystalline body shifting colors from blue to deep purple, a sign of distress in his species. "They are ancient machines, older than most civilizations. They consume entire star systems, breaking down planets and stars for raw materials to build more of themselves." Lieutenant Amy Carter, the station's communications officer, felt her hands tighten on her control panel. She exchanged a quick look with her commanding officer, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. These were the exact same aliens who had spent decades calling humans Deathworld savages and primitive warmongers, the same ones who had built massive barriers around human space, claiming that humanity was too dangerous and violent to be trusted with interstellar travel. The same aliens who had laughed when human ambassadors requested trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The same ones who had posted warnings throughout the galaxy, telling other species that humans were nothing more than barely civilized animals who had somehow stumbled upon space travel. "We have lost 17 worlds in just 3 months, Velix continued, his voice getting quieter. "Billions of our people, gone. Turned into raw matter to feed their endless hunger for expansion." Admiral Jackson tilted her head slightly, the only sign that she was even listening. Her voice remained completely flat and emotionless as she asked, "And you come to us because—" The question hung in the air like a blade. Everyone on the bridge knew exactly why the aliens had come, but they wanted to hear it spoken aloud. They wanted the creatures who had treated humanity like dangerous pets to admit what they really thought of human capabilities. Velix's crystalline form flickered and dimmed even further, his proud alien features showing something that looked almost human: shame. His next words came out barely above a whisper, but in the silent bridge, everyone heard them clearly. "Because we need killers." The truth hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. After decades of being told they were too violent, too aggressive, too primitive for civilized space, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had finally encountered something they could not handle with their peaceful, diplomatic methods. Something that required exactly the kind of ruthless, determined violence that humanity specialized in. Captain Brooks felt. A cold smile touched the corner of his mouth as he continued analyzing the alien fleet data. Their weapons were depleted, their shields failing, and their crew numbers showed massive casualties. These proud, advanced beings had been running from something they could not fight or negotiate with, and now they needed the Deathworld savages to save them. The conference room on Luna Command felt cold and sterile, with its white walls and harsh lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Admiral Jackson moved with deliberate slowness as she activated the holographic display system, her fingers pressing buttons that brought decades of hidden files into the light. The blue glow from the projectors cast strange shadows across her weathered face as classified documents began floating in the air between the humans and their alien visitors. General David Hayes sat at the far end of the metal table, his thick fingers drumming against the surface as he scrolled through file after file of documentation. His weathered face, marked by years of military service, grew darker with each page he read, his jaw clenched tighter as he saw the same patterns repeated over and over again: trade sanctions that had crippled human colonies, territorial restrictions that had trapped humanity in their own solar system like prisoners, and diplomatic rejections that had been delivered with barely concealed disgust. 30 years, General Hayes muttered under his breath, his rough voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed fury. 30 years they treated us like animals in a cage, and now they come crawling back when they need us to bite something for them. Colonel Lisa Parker, sitting across from him, pulled up another set of files with practiced efficiency. Her short brown hair was pulled back military style, and her green eyes burned with cold anger as she read through the aliens' own historical records. These weren't human interpretations or summaries, these were the actual documents. The aliens had filed with their own governments, describing humanity in terms that made her stomach turn. The alien delegation sat rigid in their specially designed chairs, their various body types accommodated by the adjustable seating, but clearly uncomfortable with the direction this meeting was taking. Ambassador Velix's crystalline form had dimmed to a barely visible shimmer, while his companion, the insectoid creature called Threx, kept his compound eyes focused on the table surface. Refusing to meet any human gaze, Colonel Parker began reading aloud from the holographic display, her voice carrying clearly through the room's audio system. Species designation: 47 Gamma exhibits excessive aggression and territorial behavior patterns that make them unsuitable for integration into civilized galactic society. Their violent tendencies and primitive emotional responses present a clear danger to peaceful species. We recommend continued isolation protocols pending significant evolutionary development. Estimated timeline of 5 to 10,000 years minimum. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Each sentence had been written by the same aliens who now sat begging for human military intervention. The same beings who had portrayed themselves as wise, advanced civilizations, guiding the galaxy toward peace and prosperity, had spent decades describing humans as barely controlled monsters. Threx's insectoid clicking sounds grew more agitated as Colonel Parker continued reading. Additional notes suggest that humanity's natural aggression could be useful in specific circumstances, but only under strict supervision and control. Any independent human military action should be prevented at all costs. Captain Blake Harrison, who had been quietly reviewing tactical reports, looked up from his datapad with an expression that could have frozen water. They actually wrote contingency plans for what to do if we ever broke containment, he said, his voice flat but dangerous. Military strike protocols for hitting Earth if we ever developed faster than light travel on our own. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the low hum of the station's life support systems seemed to quiet down, as if the machines themselves were holding their breath. Admiral Jackson finally spoke, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect through decades of military service. Her words came out measured and controlled, but everyone in the room could hear the steel beneath them. "We'll consider your request," she said. And for the first time since the aliens had arrived, she allowed herself a small smile. It was not a warm or friendly expression. It was the kind of smile a predator might wear when cornering wounded prey. "After we review the terms of any agreement," Captain Harrison leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on the table as he stared directly at the uncomfortable aliens. You see, we've learned patience from our isolation. 30 years of being locked in our own solar system gave us plenty of time to think, to plan, and to prepare for the day when the galaxy might need exactly what you've been trying to suppress. The alien delegates shifted nervously in their seats, finally beginning to understand that they had not come to hire mercenaries or request assistance from grateful allies. They had walked into a room full of beings who had spent 3 decades planning for this exact moment, the day when their captors would need to become their supplicants. The war room deep inside Titan Base buzzed with activity as dozens of human military personnel worked at their stations, their faces lit by the glow of tactical displays and star charts. The massive holographic projector in the center of the room showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with red zones marking where the Devourers had already struck, and yellow areas indicating their projected advance paths. The alien observers stood at the edge of the room, their various forms of alien biology, clearly struggling to process what they were witnessing. General David Hayes moved around the central display, like a predator circling prey, his thick finger pointing at different star systems as he explained the human battle strategy. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had spent decades planning for exactly this kind of large-scale conflict, even though humanity had never fought a galactic war before. "First wave hits here," he said, indicating a cluster of systems along the Devourer advance route. "We deploy our heavy cruiser squadrons in a standard pincer formation, but that's just a distraction. The real attack comes from these coordinates." Captain Jake Morrison, standing at a tactical workstation covered in glowing buttons and screens, pulled up detailed strike plans that made the alien observers physically recoil. His casual tone made the horrific scale of destruction sound like he was discussing weekend plans. "Nuclear saturation bombing of their forward positions," Morrison explained, his fingers dancing across the controls to highlight target zones. "We've calculated that approximately 1,500 nuclear warheads per system should be sufficient to eliminate their resource collection capabilities. After that, we seed the approach vectors with antimatter mines, about 10,000 per major hyperspace lane." The insectoid alien called Threx began making rapid clicking sounds, his compound eyes reflecting what could only be described as pure disgust. His translation device struggled to keep up with his agitated communication attempts before finally producing understandable words. "You're discussing the complete destruction of inhabited systems." Threx buzzed through his mechanical translator, his multiple arms gesturing frantically at the display. "Those are civilized worlds, with billions of innocent lives. You're talking about genocide on a scale that even the Devourers haven't achieved." Colonel Beth Reynolds, who had been quietly reviewing casualty projections at her workstation, turned to face the insectoid with an expression of cold practicality. Her brown hair was streaked with gray from years of military service, and her eyes held the kind of hardness that came from making impossible decisions. "You told us those systems were already lost," she said, her voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. "You said the Devourers had consumed everything useful and were moving on to the next targets. We're being practical about accepting reality." Commander Patricia Johnson stepped forward from her position at the strategic planning station, carrying a datapad loaded with statistical analyses that would have made civilian populations riot if they ever saw the numbers. Her voice remained steady and professional as she delivered information that represented the deaths of trillions of beings. "According to our projections, approximately 40% of the Outer Rim systems will be completely uninhabitable for the next 1,000 years, Johnson reported, without the slightest hesitation in her voice. "The radiation levels from our nuclear bombardment will make planetary surfaces toxic to most known forms of life. However, we can establish temporary refugee camps on the surviving worlds and relocate the civilian populations to designated safe zones." Admiral Jackson studied the tactical projections with the kind of professional detachment that military leaders developed after decades of sending people to die. for strategic objectives. Her weathered face showed no more emotion than if she were reviewing supply requisitions or maintenance schedules. "What's our estimated timeline for total system sterilization?" she asked, treating the complete destruction of entire solar systems like a routine logistics question. 6 months for full implementation, Johnson replied immediately. 12 months for complete radiation saturation. Any devourer technology left in those systems will be destroyed by the ambient radiation levels, even if our direct strikes miss their primary targets. Ambassador Velix's crystalline form flickered and sparked with what appeared to be shock and horror. His usually composed alien features twisted into expressions that needed no translation as he struggled to comprehend the scale of destruction humans were discussing as casually as a construction project. "This is not warfare," Velix managed to say, his voice carrying a tremor that his translation device amplified. "This is systematic annihilation of entire regions of space. You're talking about making huge sections of the galaxy uninhabitable for centuries." Admiral Jackson turned to look directly at the alien ambassador, and for the first time since the meeting began, her professional mask slipped slightly. What showed underneath was something far more dangerous than military efficiency. It was the cold fury of someone who had been caged and dismissed for decades. "This," she corrected, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years of suppressed anger, "is how Deathworld species fight when you take away their mercy." The massive conference hall aboard the Confederation's flagship felt like a tomb as hundreds of alien representatives from across the galaxy sat in perfect silence. The ship itself was a marvel of alien engineering, stretching over 50 kilometers in length and designed to house diplomatic meetings between species that breathed different atmospheres and required different gravity settings. But today, all that advanced technology seemed meaningless as the alien leadership faced a reality they had never imagined possible. Admiral Rebecca Jackson walked slowly to the center of the chamber, her black military boots clicking against the polished floor with each measured step. Her uniform was crisp and perfectly pressed, bearing the newly created insignia of Earth's United Defense Force, an emblem that featured a stylized Earth surrounded by crossed weapons. The symbol was simple but unmistakable in its message. Humanity was no longer asking for permission to exist in galactic society. Earth will deploy our full military capacity against the devourers, Admiral Jackson began, her clear voice carrying easily across the vast chamber without any need for amplification systems. Every word was pronounced with perfect clarity and absolute authority. Our fleets, our weapons, our soldiers, and our willingness to do whatever is necessary to stop this threat. She paused, letting the weight of that promise settle over the assembled aliens before continuing. In exchange, all discriminatory legislation against Deathworld species will be permanently repealed. Every law, every regulation, every trade restriction that has been used to keep humanity and other aggressive species locked away from galactic civilization will be removed from Confederation legal codes. General David Hayes moved forward from his position behind the Admiral, his massive 6'4" frame making him tower over most of the alien representatives. His weathered face, marked by decades of military service, showed no mercy or compromise as he delivered the next set of demands. Additionally, Hayes said, his rough voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, humanity will receive permanent security oversight of all Confederation worlds deemed strategically vital to galactic defense. This includes the right to establish military bases, station fleets, and deploy defensive systems wherever human commanders determine necessary. The implications of those words hit the alien delegation like a series of hammer blows. These weren't requests or negotiations. They were demands backed by the threat of abandoning the galaxy to the devourers if humanity's terms weren't accepted completely. Captain Ryan Brooks stepped forward from the human delegation, carrying a datapad loaded with detailed legal documentation that had clearly been prepared well in advance. His voice carried the clinical precision of someone reading from carefully rehearsed talking points. Population relocations will be handled exclusively by human military authorities, Brooks announced, his words cutting through the chamber like a blade. Any civilian populations living in areas designated as security zones will be moved to safer locations at human discretion. Resistance to relocation orders will be considered an act of aggression against Confederation security and will be dealt with accordingly. The alien representatives began making various sounds of distress, clicking, buzzing, humming, and other forms of communication that their translation devices struggled to process. The meaning, however, was clear in every language. They were watching their entire civilization being placed under human military control. Ambassador Velix's crystalline form, which had already been dimmed by stress and fear, now became so transparent that he was barely visible against his chair. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, sounded hollow and defeated. "You're not offering to save us," Velix said, his words barely above a whisper, but clearly audible in the silent chamber. "You're demanding that we surrender our entire civilization to human control. This isn't a rescue. This is conquest, disguised as assistance." Admiral Jackson's expression remained completely unchanged, her face showing no more emotion than if she were discussing routine supply schedules. When she spoke, her voice carried the cold certainty of someone who held all the power in the room. "You came to the monsters for help," she replied, her words deliberate and carefully chosen. "You spent 30 years telling the galaxy that humans were too dangerous, too violent, too primitive to be trusted with freedom. Did you really expect us to remain caged and grateful after we solve your problem for you?" Colonel Janet Martinez, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the human delegation, stepped forward and added her own contribution to the conversation. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but her words carried a sting that made several aliens physically recoil. "We learned from the best teachers," Martinez said, looking directly at the alien leadership. "You showed us exactly how advanced civilizations treat species they consider inferior. Now we're simply applying those same lessons to our relationship with you." The truth hung in the air like poison gas, and every being in that chamber understood that the galaxy had fundamentally changed forever. 6 months had passed since the final Devourer machine had been blown apart by human weapons, and the galaxy felt like a completely different place. Ambassador Velix pressed his crystalline hands against the cold metal railing of his homeworld's observation deck, staring out through the massive, transparent aluminum windows at a sight that still made his light flicker with despair. Human warships moved in perfect formation around Thaler Prime, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had proven devastatingly effective against the ancient machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy. The ships moved with mechanical precision, never deviating from their patrol routes, never allowing any vessel to approach or leave the planet without proper authorization from human command. The war itself had been shockingly brief once humanity had committed their forces. Military experts across the galaxy had predicted years of brutal fighting, massive casualties, and Pyrrhic victories that would leave entire star systems in ruins. Instead, the human fleets had swept through Devourer-controlled space like a plague, destroying everything in their path with ruthless efficiency that made even veteran military observers sick to their stomachs. But the victory had not come from having better weapons or stronger ships than their enemies. The human advantage had been something far more terrifying: their complete willingness to sacrifice anything and everything to achieve total victory, while other species had tried to find diplomatic solutions or minimize casualties. Humans had studied the Devourers, like scientists examining bacteria under microscopes. They had captured Devourer technology intact, reverse-engineered it with frightening speed, and then turned the machine's own weapons against them. Human engineers had learned to think like the ancient artificial intelligence, calculating resources and efficiency with cold mathematical precision, while somehow maintaining the biological instinct for survival that made them unpredictable and dangerous. The holographic projector near the observation deck hummed to life, casting blue light that slowly formed into the familiar shape of Captain Ryan Brooks. Except now, he wore the insignia of a planetary governor, and his title had changed to reflect humanity's new role in galactic affairs. Governor Brooks of the Outer Rim Territories, a position that gave him absolute authority over dozens of star systems and billions of alien lives. Your people are adapting well to the new security protocols, Brooks observed, his tone conversational and almost friendly. But Vilix could hear the underlying message clearly. The humans were watching everything, monitoring every communication, tracking every movement of his civilization, with the same methodical thoroughness they had used to hunt down the Devourers. Vilix's crystalline form flickered weakly, the light inside his body dimming as waves of exhaustion and defeat washed over him. "We underestimated you completely," he admitted, his voice barely audible through the translation device. "We thought that 30 years of isolation would weaken you, make you desperate for our approval and grateful for any scraps of acceptance we might offer." Governor Brooks nodded slowly, his expression showing what might have been sympathy if Felix hadn't known better. "Isolation taught us patience," Brooks replied, his words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "It taught us to think long-term, to plan for every possible scenario, and most importantly, it taught us that mercy is a luxury that predators can't afford when their survival is at stake." Through the massive viewport, Felix watched human cargo vessels arriving at the orbital docking stations, their holds filled with what the humans politely called relocated populations. These were civilians from dozens of worlds that had been redesignated as strategic defense zones, places where human military commanders had decided that alien populations presented potential security risks. The relocations were carried out with perfect efficiency and minimal violence, but they were still forced deportations of entire civilizations from their ancestral homes. Families that had lived on the same worlds for thousands of years were being loaded onto transport ships and moved to designated refugee settlements on planets chosen by human administrators. The galaxy was indeed safe from the Devourers. No machine intelligence would ever again threaten to consume entire star systems. But the price of that safety was becoming more horrifying with each passing day, as the alien civilizations realized what they had actually surrendered in exchange for human protection. The proud species that had once ruled the galaxy through diplomatic coalitions and trade agreements now found themselves living under the watchful eyes of the same Deathworld savages they had spent decades trying to contain. The humans had not just defeated the Devourers, they had used the crisis to completely restructure galactic civilization according to their own harsh principles. Every major decision now required human approval. Every military deployment had to be authorized by human commanders. Every trade agreement needed to be reviewed by human economic specialists, who applied the same ruthless efficiency to resource management that they had used in warfare. Admiral Jackson's final words during what the humans had called the surrender ceremony still echoed in Vilix's memory, like a curse that would never fade. "You taught us that the galaxy has no place for weakness or sentiment. You showed us that advanced civilizations survive by controlling those they consider inferior. Thank you for the lesson. We learned it well." The monsters had indeed saved the galaxy, but in doing so, they had become its new masters.